welcome to Talking DV, a podcast that focuses on domestic violence and practical guidance on how to leave a relationship where your husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, or whoever might be harming you. My name is Dean Hinton. I'm a licensed attorney in the state of Tennessee. For almost a decade, I've handled cases involving people whose partners have been physically, emotionally, and financially abusive to them. By providing practical guidance to you, my guest and I will hopefully help you escape harmful relationships. In this episode of Talking DV, Stacy Scruggs and I will continue talking about the Safe at Home program, including using the Safe at Home program in rural communities, co-parenting in the Safe at Home program, and how to become an applicant assistant, how to help other people enroll in the Safe at Home program. And so, Stacy, do you have any insight into how a person covered by this program is supposed to co-parent with their abuser, stalker, whoever? Maybe that doesn't really come up in your world, but it is kind of interesting to know how that might happen.
It does come up often in our world. We have a lot of participants who are co-parenting. What I'm seeing with the courts is that it is the responsibility of the participant to contact their attorney and the courts that are handling their specific cases to notify them that they are now in the Safe at Home program. And then the courts can make the determination as to how they are going to handle those exchanges with the children, the visitation, all of that stuff. That's outside of our scope of responsibility. But what I'm seeing for the most part is the courts saying, okay, well, you don't need to be going to each other's houses. Let's set up a third-party exchange for the children. It also depends on what those parenting plans say. I have some participants in the program whose the other parent doesn't have the right to the school records and to know where the kids go to school, so that information is not shared. But then we also have other participants in the program that the other parent does have the right to know that information. And the other bio parent will pick up the child at school for their visitation and then drop that child back off at school, and then the other parent collects them at the school. So it just depends on what the specific court paperwork says for that family and what they're dealing with. And it's different for each participant.
Is there any limitation, and again, you touched on this earlier, but is there any limitation on how long a person stays in the program?
Once someone is enrolled in the program, their initial participation is for 4 years. At the end of 4 years, I contact them personally and say, hey, you're about to expire. Would you like to expand your participation in the program? And at that point, I will walk them through the renewal process. The renewal process is going to look different for each victim depending on how they were enrolled in the program. If someone was enrolled in the program with a letter from a licensed professional for 4 years, they're going to need to get another letter from a licensed professional to extend their participation for 4 more years. If they were enrolled in the program with a lifetime order of protection, they're not going to have to get any more documentation for us. They're just going to have to fill out a renewal application, and they're pretty much in the program for life. But we do step them through a renewal process every 4 years.
Every 4 years?
Yeah.
How does a person in the program protect themselves in addition to being in the program? Safety planning, is there any other guidance that you want to give or do give people in the program in addition to this? For example, you got to be careful about social media.
Oh, social media is the worst. That is the biggest problem that we have is with social media.
Because of the pictures and stuff behind?
Well, it's there's metadata and images that people put on social media that give away GPS coordinations and those sorts of things. Just people tagging themselves everywhere they go, and somebody can find you where you are and just follow you to your home. I had a participant who was followed to her home because she was tagging herself on social media. So when someone gets into the program, that's one of the things on the list that we give them is we're protecting state and local government records, but how are you sharing your information on social media? Are you giving your information out to a lot of people? Are you having a lot of get-togethers at your house? Those sorts of things where that information could get out. So they have to look at all of that. I typically recommend that our participants sign up with a company like Delete Me or something like that will purge your information from the internet, and that they use aliases on their social media, those sorts of things. This program is only going to work as well as they work it. I can put them in Safe at Home and give them a substitute address and block everything from state and local government records. But if they have a very heavy social media presence, it's going to be very easy to locate them.
You got to be careful that you're not being followed. I mean, if the person can't find your address, they can still physically follow you, perhaps.
Yeah.
The children might leak where you are or your address or something like that.
One of my partnering agencies had that conversation with a potential participant not too long ago who was moving to a new address. It was in a very volatile, life-threatening situation, but her offender knew where she worked. and she didn't want to change jobs. And the partnering agency told her, you're still taking a significant risk by staying at your current employer, because if he may not know where you live, but he can just come to your workplace. So they have to think about all of that stuff. You're basically doing an audit on your entire life when you get into this program to figure out where those risk factors are. And that's what the safety planning is. So to say, okay, well, we can put you in safe at home, but you go to the same gym, so let's look at all of those sorts of things to see what you specifically need to do to keep yourself safe.
Yeah, and I've had this conversation with some of my clients where they feel like they're being punished or they're being, I don't know, why do I have to stay off social media?
Yeah.
I'm not the abusive person here. But I mean, at the same time, you've got to protect yourself. That's just the way it is. Unfortunately, you have this person that was in your life that is very difficult to get rid of.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't control the way other people behave. We can only control how we react to it. Basically what it comes down to. When other people behave inappropriately, it's so frustrating because there's nothing that we can do to make them stop doing what they're doing. The only thing that's within our control is how can we keep ourselves safe? What can I do to mitigate the damage from this situation? And that's where that safety planning is going to come in, and keeping your information off of things and not going to places where you're going to be putting yourself in danger. And it does feel like punishment as a victim to say, well, why can't I do what I want to do when I want to do it? It is not fair. It's not, life is not fair. But unfortunately, these situations become so volatile that these victims don't have any other choice than to take these drastic measures to keep themselves safe.
A police officer came to our office at Legal Aid and was giving us some information about safety and so forth. And what he kept repeating was there's a lot of mental illness out there and there's a lot of substance abuse.
There is.
So those kind of combinations just with people's inner whatever to hurt other people in whatever form that might be leads to these kind of situations where maybe you didn't see it early on, but it manifested itself over time.
And it seems to be increasing. And I think social media does have some play in that, and that people are just becoming more brazen about things, about confronting people and speaking in an aggressive manner and behaving in inappropriate ways. For the longest time, that was just kind of on social media, but it's been on social media for so long now, it's bleeding over into real life. And people are interacting in ways face-to-face now that before they never would have done that. But social media has just kind of deconditioned all of us to accept levels of behavior that we wouldn't accept before. And that line creeps over time, and it just keeps getting pushed further and further and further out with these offenders. So, yeah, there's a lot of that out there, a lot of mental illness, a lot of substance abuse.
Kind of like, I think this is the right word, trolling online,
yes.
At least the trolling,
exactly.
In person.
Yeah, exactly. You hear people communicating online in a way that you think, oh, well, they would never speak to someone in person that way. But we've all become so desensitized to it online that now when you do hear it in person, it seems to not be that big of a deal that people are communicating the way that they are. And it leads to an escalation in physical behavior.
Are there any other warnings or words of caution for those in the program or going to be in the program as far as keeping their whereabouts private?
The main thing for me is just who are you sharing your information with? We've become so conditioned in our society to hand out our information all day, every day to everyone for basic interactions. And it's something as simple as, getting a grocery card or buying something at the mall. Every time you swipe your debit card, you're giving that entity your home address who's going to share it with another data broker, and it's going to end up online eventually. We're just so used to doing that we don't realize how easy it is for our information to get out there. I'll have participants call me that I'll put in the program, and they'll say, I've been living at my house for a month now, and I just got a piece of junk mail in my mailbox with my name and my address on it. How did that happen? I'm like, okay, well, let's think about this. Where are you swiping your debit card? Every time you do that, you're giving out your information because your home address was probably attached to your bank account. It's very difficult in the day and age that we live in, even with these types of resources like Safe at Home, to keep your information truly confidential. It's very difficult to do.
And I imagine also there's a concern about third parties. In other words, I might trust this person, but maybe you should not have trusted that person with where you live because your abuser might charm them. It's called stalking by proxy.
Yes.
I've heard advocates call it the flying monkey, from the Wizard of Oz, where the Wicked Witch sends out the monkeys to do her evil bidding or whatever.
Yeah.
And so
I hear that quite often from victims who are in the program who have offenders who are incarcerated, who say that their incarcerated offender is having other people harass them and stalk them and follow them and try to do harm to them or their property because the offender is now in jail because of something that they did to them. So yeah, that's a very common theme.
That other person, the survivor, is to blame for this.
Oh, of
look
course.
what you did to me.
Yeah.
You put me completely forgetting that they did something illegal, criminal.
The problem is your reaction to the behavior, not the behavior.
So what about leaving the program? I think you mentioned a withdrawal form. Is that right?
Yeah, leaving the program is very simple. If at any time somebody decides that they don't like the way that Safe at Home is working, they just sign a withdrawal form and I close their file and they can immediately start using their regular address just like anyone else.
When you say immediately, that's within 24 hours, whatever your time frame is.
Yeah, the second they send me the form, they can, technically, they can start using their confidential address where they live at any time. They can start giving it out to anybody at any time. So
they can sort of break their own code of silence.
Yeah, at some point, the program just stops working even if they're still in it. So, for example, I have a participant in the program who I receive all of her mail from state and local government agencies and all of her mail from the courts having to do with her offender. But she has family members that know her confidential address that send letters directly to her home because she trusts those family members not to give out that address to those other parties. So the Safe at Home address that we give them is to use at their discretion where they feel like those gaps are. We're not barring them from using their confidential address. They just have to be aware of the fact that if they do give out their actual home address, that they're putting it at risk of it becoming public in some form or fashion.
Are there good reasons to leave the program? For example, maybe the stalker or the abuser died and they died because...
Oh, we've had that happen. Yeah. I had a participant who was in the program for about 3 weeks and she called me. She said, my offender is deceased. I no longer need the program.
So that's a good reason.
That's a good
reason.
Are
there other good reasons maybe that you... as the administrator, you think of good reasons?
As long as you qualify for the program, I recommend continuing the program as long as you're qualifying for it. I do have participants who have been in the program for 4 years, though, who came up to that renewal line, and I would call them and say, do you want to expand your participation? And they would say, no, I feel like I'm in a good place right now. My offender hasn't bothered me in 3 years, and we've all kind of moved on, so I don't think I need it anymore. And I'm like, great. I don't want somebody to have to need this program because that means that they're dealing with some very severe issues. But if in the future their situation ever changes and they need to get back in, they can if you leave the program. If once you leave, you're not barred from ever coming back in. This is meant to be a tool for these victims to utilize as they see fit within their safety plan. Sometimes it fits in and sometimes it doesn't.
I've been doing domestic violence work for maybe 9 years or so at Legal Aid. In my experience, it's really difficult to get rid of a stalker, abuser, harasser, whatever you want to call them. In my mind, there's always a word of caution to think, hey, I'm safe now, whatever criteria you're basing that on. I just feel an unease about that just because of this line of work.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I'm even as cautious as to say, when somebody gets into the program, they'll say, oh, I feel so much better because I'm in Safe at Home now and I feel safe. And I'm like, okay, well, we're protecting your address. But remember that there are other things that play into this. So I don't want you to have a false sense of security that this program is the end-all be-all kind of a thing.
It reminds me of orders of protection. We get the order of protection, and a lot of people say, well, it's just a piece of paper. It's not going to stop a bullet, which is very true. But I do believe in orders of protection. They establish a boundary between those spouses or whatever. So I hear you. I completely understand that. It's just a step in the process.
Yes.
But we've already talked about with social media and so forth, you do got to protect yourself.
Yeah, and Save at Home is doing the same thing. It's setting a boundary, and it's keeping those home addresses out of publicly accessible records. So we're doing what we can while at the same time being very careful that we're communicating what the scope of this program is and that it's not overly broad. We're only protecting these state and local government records and nothing else, because that's where the social media and all of those other things come into play.
Are there bad reasons to leave the program? Maybe, at least in your mind?
So if someone is not following the rules of the program, we do have within our statute the ability to remove them from the program if we become aware of the fact that they are utilizing the program in a nefarious manner.
Is there an example of that?
There is an example I can give of this. I had one participant in the program who was enrolled in the program, who had a minor child in the program. I later found out this participant had a court order in another state that said that she was not allowed to leave that other state with that child. Once we became aware of that, we communicated with that participant and said, are you legally allowed to have that child in this state? That participant said no. And at that point, the participation was discontinued. After a very long conversation, it went on for like 6 months because there's an appeal process if we remove someone from the program. It's not an overnight thing, but there are situations where we can remove people from the program if they are not following the rules.
That might have been a legitimate reason for that person to fear and get in the program.
Yeah.
However, I don't want to talk about loopholes because supposedly all the law is a loophole, but there might be other reasons why this person just cannot stay in there.
Exactly. Well, Safe at Home can never be used to avoid legal or financial responsibilities of the participant. So if you have bill collectors sending you bills, you're still going to get them. They're just going to come through me first. Same thing with court orders. If there's a court order that says you have to be at court on a certain day, you still have to go. You can't avoid that court date, which we had happen with a participant because she thought, oh, well, I'm in Safe at Home now, I don't have to go. And that's not how it works. So we just keep the home address out of those records, but you are still bound by any other court orders regarding any legal or financial responsibilities while you're in this program. So,
do you get peppered with those kind of questions a lot? In other words, a participant might contact you and say, hey, I got subpoenaed in court. Do I have to go? And you're like, yeah, you got to go.
Yeah, I get those kind of questions all the time. So-and-so was recently awarded unsupervised visitation. Do we have to do that? Because we're in Safe at Home now. I'm like, yeah, you do have to do that because Safe at Home, and this is one of the tricky things that I see as a mediator, is that Safe at Home, even though we protect that address from state and local government records, we do not override the parental rights of that other parent, even if that other parent is the offender. They still have their legal parental rights that the court has afforded to them that we have to abide by. But with that said, I have people in the program who have orders of protections against other people who have orders of protections against them. Because you see those domestic violence situations where there's OPs flying in every direction and you're trying to figure out a visitation schedule and who's supervised and who isn't. And these situations can get very complicated.
But you're not analyzing who's... Was it mutual? Was it not mutual?
No, that's outside the scope of Safe at Home. We do not get involved in their specific legal situations in any way. All I'm doing is determining, do they meet the move requirement? Can we protect their address? And are they a victim? We do not get involved in their situations in a legal manner in any way, nor do we advocate on behalf of our participants in a legal manner.
Getting back to bad reasons to leave, and I talked about my unease with a person perhaps getting out of the program because they think they're now, quote unquote, safe. I mean, is that a bad reason? In other words, hey, I think I'm safe, but it's been a year and a half. Everything's been quiet, but maybe that's because you've been going out of your way to protect yourself like you're supposed to.
Yeah, well, I always take the stance of supporting whatever decision the victim makes because I don't know their specific situation. I don't know what their threat level is because, again, I don't work with them in a victim advocate way in any way. I'm strictly just working with them in an administrative capacity in keeping their address confidential. So if they tell me, I've been in the program for 3 years and I feel like I'm safe now, I want to get out of the program, my only response to that would be, well, let us know if you need us in the future. I'll step you through the process to unenroll you from the program. I'll make sure that they have contact information for a partnering agency where they live if they need to vet that situation further to see if they're going to save. I do a lot of soft handoffs to my partnering agencies to make sure that they have the resources that they need. But I never want to put myself into a position to determine whether or not someone's fear is legitimate or not. I just don't even go there.
I like that term, soft handoff. Soft handoff. How does that scenario usually play out? In other words, I think I'm safe. I'm getting out of the program. Do you have those who say, oh, I made a mistake. I need to be back in this program. Please put me back in? Or is that a rarity?
So I have had a couple of participants leave the program and then come back in, where I've what I call reactivated their participation. Mm-hmm. Typically, that's a situation where I will have a participant who's been in the program for 2 or 3 years. They will move out of state due to financial reasons. They'll have to go somewhere else because they don't have somewhere to live or something like that. And then that situation won't work out. So they'll end up back in Tennessee. When they come back to Tennessee, I just reactivate their participation. There hasn't really been a specific situation where somebody said, I don't feel like I need the program, and then a month later called me back and said, well, I changed my mind. I do need the program. That hasn't happened because Where the problem is going to come in is if you leave this program and actively start using your real address, you've just disqualified yourself for this program unless you move. So I can give you an example of that. I had a participant call me and she said, I've made a huge mistake. I let my offender back into my life. And this person knows where I live now. We're all human. We've all been there and done that. You make decisions sometimes that in hindsight may not have been the best decision. And I said, that's okay. We understand that happens. Are you going to stay at your address now that this person knows where you live? This participant said, no, I've already put in a request to move and I'm going to be moving within the next 30 days. I said, okay, well, we'll just keep you in the program. And when you get to your new location, just update us with where you are. And then the program will start working again. Because once you told your offender where you were, the program just stopped working in that moment. It ceased to function. But once you move to your new address, it's going to start working again. So they just have to kind of make those decisions as to whether or not. And it's fascinating in that working with victims in Safe at Home, and in total, I've worked with probably 1,600 victims in the last 7 years. Every situation is so unique. And it really keeps me on my toes in thinking about, okay, well, what is this program actually doing for you is my ultimate question. Is it actually keeping you safe? Because I don't want to give people that false sense of security of thinking, oh, well, I'm in Safe at Home. I'm good. I don't have to worry about anything. I am having that conversation with them to say, okay, is this program really doing anything for you? And if it's not, do you want to be in the program? Because logistically, it takes work to be in Safe at Home. You're using the substitute address. Your mail is going through a third party. There's a lot of things that you have to do to be in this program. And do you feel like it's necessary for you to do that to keep yourself safe? And sometimes I will have victims think about it and they're like, no. I had a woman who was actively in a domestic violence shelter said that she thought Safe at Home was too much work. But that's up to her to whether or not she decides to do that. We're just here to support them wherever they are and just kind of meet them there.
We said this already, that if I want to be in the program, I need to find, and you can help me do that,
yeah.
Or I can find a different way, an application assistant. We talked about they could be an attorney,
yeah.
a police officer, and so forth. How does one become an application assistant if I wanted to be one?
Yeah, so partnering agencies, I have all across the state. I've probably got 150 or so partnering agencies across the state. If you are already with one of our partnering agencies, you can just speak with your employer, let them know that you want to be trained and Safe at Home. I typically get a call from the partnering agency that says, hey, we have new employees coming on. We would like them trained and Safe at Home. 60-minute WebEx. I get someone trained and certified to be an application assistant. It's a very straightforward process. If someone is not with one of our partnering agencies and contacts me and says that they want to be an application assistant, at that point, I'll be having a conversation with that organization, with the management, to make sure they understand what we are and to see what kind of interaction they're having with our victims who are in this program with these victim categories, to see if this program would be beneficial for their staff. So, for example, Chattanooga Housing Authority contacted me, and they said, we need to be trained on this. We need to have application assistance in this because we're moving people all day, every day who are dealing with these issues, and we need help with this. So I jumped in and got probably 20 people with their organization trained to be application assistants, and I get applications from them all the time. But then there are other organizations that will contact me that are interested in knowing about Safe at Home, but they don't really directly work with victims. So I'll say, well, it may be more beneficial for you to just refer to one of our other partnering agencies that are going to be able to provide some of those additional wraparound services. I spoke with one organization not too long ago that was an upstart organization that was like just getting off the ground. And I said, contact me back in 6 months once you're kind of up and running and you've got those resources available. All of that to say, if somebody contacts me, they want to be an application assistant, I can either come to them in person to do the training for their organization. I'm actually going to WRAP the end of this week to train a bunch of their new employees in person, or I can just set up a WebEx and do it remotely because it's a pretty straightforward process.
Let's say I'm a stay-at-home dad.
Yeah.
And I'm not affiliated with any organization. I'm watching a couple of kids, but I am concerned about the safety of the public, and
yeah.
I want to be an application assistant. But again, I'm not part of any agency, and I come to you and I say, hey, I'd like to be an application assistant. It doesn't sound like I'm...
No.
It doesn't work that way. I could be an abuser. I could be mentally unstable. There's no way to do a background check on me. We're hoping the partner agencies will do that and rely on their expertise to hire good people.
Exactly. The partnering agencies are vetting whether or not these employees or volunteers are appropriate for that organization. If you are not with a state-approved organization that's touching these types of victims or providing a direct government service, I would not train you to be an application assistant.
What does that person need to do to qualify to be an application assistant? First of all, they have to be in a partner agency. And then second of all, they have to get your training.
Yeah.
And what does that look like, the training?
So the training is about a 60-minute WebEx where I'm going to, or in person, if they wish to do so, where I'm going to step them through what the basic law says for the Safe at Home program, the MOVE requirements, the victim requirements, all of that. For the most part, because the application assistants that I'm training have already had trauma-informed care training, they're working in the legal field, they're working with DV organizations, I'm not going to spend a lot of time concerning myself with the victim statuses. It's more just about, do you understand what the Safe at Home law is? And if you do, here's how you fill out an application. And I step them through every single line of the application, how they fill it out, why we need the information that we need, what they have to put on each line, and then how they're submitting that application to me for approval.
And then you said this, but it's 60 minutes long? Is that the training?
It's about 60 minutes.
In total?
Yeah.
What happens once a person completes the training?
Once they complete the training, they're going to complete what's called an application assistant application, which is on our website that just says who they work for, what their credentials are, and that they have completed a training with me. Once they send that application assistant application to me, I'm going to make sure that they've completed the training and that they're with an appropriate agency, and then I'm going to have them certified and they're good to go.
You've said this already, the website for the Safe at Home program in Tennessee. What is it again, please?
safeathometn.com.
Let's say I can just put in the browser window, Google search or whatever, Safe at Home Tennessee, and then that'll be the first thing that pops up.
It's going to come up, yeah.
There's a Q&A on there.
There's a lot of information on there.
There's an email address, and it actually goes straight to you.
It does, yeah.
It doesn't have your name, but still.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to think of what else the website has, but pretty
phone,
much anything you need to know.
Anything you need to know is on that website. One of the most beneficial things on our website is when you go to safeathometn.com, the first button says, what is Safe at Home? When you click on that button, there's about a 3-minute whiteboard video there that fully explains what the Safe at Home program is. It's a cute little cartoon. You can just click on it and watch it. That way you don't have to read through everything if you don't want to. That explains to you what the Safe at Home program is and how mail moves through the program and about the substitute address. If at that point you watch that little video and you think this sounds interesting, it sounds like something I might want to make a part of my safety plan, at that point you can reach out to us or to a partnering agency and we can start stepping you through that process.
If we haven't said this already, a person can find an application assistant through that website.
They can.
If you go
to, the first button on there says information for applicants. There's a list of application assistants by county that is listed up there.
As a one-person shop, you do a great job about spreading the word at Safe at Home program. And is there anything the rest of us can do to help spread the word about Safe at Home?
Outreach has always been a challenge for Safe at Home. Tennessee's a big state. We've got a lot of counties, but we have a lot of partnering agencies. My goal as the Safe at Home program coordinator is to make sure that all of my partnering agencies have the information that they need about Safe at Home to use as a tool in your tool bag, because you're working with the victims. Your boots on the ground. I'm in Nashville. I'm not working directly with victims, so I'm not coming into contact with these victims in these specific communities. Safe at Home has extensive outreach material available through posters and flyers and rack cards that's all available at no cost to all of our partnering agencies. So I'll give you an example of this. I have a partnering agency in East Tennessee that's a birthing center at a medical facility, and they put one of our Safe at Home flyers in every one of their birthing packets so that as women are coming through and having children, they're getting information about Safe at Home. They may not need it, but they might know somebody who does. It's all just about getting information out to the general community that Safe at Home is a thing and that it exists. I mentioned earlier that we went into effect not long before COVID hit. So a lot of the early Safe at Home communication and outreach got buried in the noise that was COVID. And now that we're on the backside of that, I just want to make sure we have as many partnering agencies as possible across the state who are serving these victims, who have trained application assistants for Safe at Home that can provide this information as part of the safety plans they are putting together for victims across the state.
For the most part, the advocates that I run into at trainings, maybe not within my office or within the firm, but outside of that, everybody seems to know about Safe at Home within our community, if you will.
Yeah, it's getting it outside that bubble.
Outside the bubble.
Yeah, we have to get it outside the bubble. So yeah, if you're working for a domestic violence organization, you know about Safe at Home. You've got the posters, you've got the rack cards, you're working with victims, but your local high school might not know about Safe at Home. So we want to make sure that that information is getting out to everyone. I've been doing a lot of outreach with the health departments and with the public schools and with the churches and with the food banks and those sorts of things, because we want to get that information out everywhere so that the general public can see that Safe at Home is available, because there's a lot of victims out there that aren't touching these organizations, that may not know that Safe at Home exists. So we have to get that information out to them.
The problem I run into in my limited world, perhaps, is that clients, they live in small communities, so their abuser kind of knows where they are just because they run into each other at Walmart, or it's not that hard to sort of figure things out. Everybody sort of knows everybody. Or they're not going to move, or they have moved and they've already, you're playing catch up with they've
already outed themselves.
Yeah, they've already outed themselves.
And when you live in a very small community, that's very difficult. When everybody knows everybody, everybody goes to church together and you have one mailman that knows where everybody lives. It can be very difficult in those small communities. That's one of the reasons why with Safe at Home, when I look at the map of participation of where all of our participants are currently located, we do see these clusters of participants popping up. And I mentioned Cumberland County earlier. We have a lot of participants in Cumberland County, and it's not because Cumberland County has more instances of domestic violence. It's because all of the people from the surrounding counties are coming into Cumberland County because that's where Avalon is. We don't have a lot of participation in Shelby County, even though it's number one for domestic violence, because most of the people I talk to that are enrolling in the program that are in Shelby County aren't staying in Shelby County. They're leaving. And they're going somewhere else because there's no housing available for them. So there's a lot of different things that play into kind of our distribution of participant enrollment based on the services that are available. Is there a shelter bed available? Do you have housing? What's the housing waiting list like? Do people have the resources to move? If you're moving in with family as a DV victim and your offender knows where all your family lives, this program isn't going to help you because they're going to be able to find you. So we have to go back to looking at what's going on with that specific victim. Is Safe at Home going to work and keep them safe? And it's different for every community across the state.
When I saw you in August at a training, you had mentioned to me briefly that there's some changes in the law having to do with Safe at Home. Can you explain what those changes are?
So one of the changes we've already kind of touched on, and that is the move requirement. Initially, when the program started, it was a very firm, you've either moved within the last 30 days or you're going to be moving. That was what it said. I went back to the state legislature and said, no, there are gray areas with victims, and we need to be aware of those gray areas and be able to navigate those gray areas, like those victims who are choosing to live off grid so that they can't be located. I speak with victims who will say, I moved 2 years ago and never updated my driver's license because I didn't want to be located. So we need to be aware of those gray areas and be able to navigate those. Another one of the things that was expanded since the law initially passed was allowing additional household members. When the law first passed, we could enroll the victim and their minor dependents, and that was it. I went back and got it expanded because what if my mom lives with me? There are a lot of multi-generational households. My offender can just trace that person to get to me. So now we can list co-applicants if your mom lives with you, if you have an adult child living with you, if you have a new spouse. All of those people can now be considered co-applicants in your household. Because again, we're not protecting that victim, we're protecting that address. And if you have a lot of other people in your household who are using that address, you're not going to be safe if you have a lot of other people there. So we've been making some minor tweaks to Safe at Home since it passed, because this was a new program within the state of Tennessee. And you get into those situations where you don't really know what you don't know. And once I started working with victims directly regarding keeping their addresses confidential, some of the things that I was seeing pop up as roadblocks, I've tried to go back and say, okay, this is a roadblock for victims, let's get this fixed, to make it easier for people to get into the program and to make it so that the program works once they're in it.
Not to get political in any way, shape, or form, but do you have a sense of how the legislature and your management within the Secretary of State's office?
Yes, Secretary of State.
How they sort of perceive the program now that it's been up and running for a while?
I think they see it as very successful because we did not have address confidentiality in any shape or form before the Safe at Home program passed. Starting this program, like I said, in the midst of a pandemic and everything else that's been going on, I think we've done very well at getting the program off the ground, but then also providing the resources that we say that we're going to be providing, like helping people with voting and helping people with their driver's licenses and court records and all of those sorts of things. So Safe at Home has been very successful in getting off the ground.
It doesn't seem like there's a lot of resources expended here. In other words, I think you have to put some postage on some mail and send it out to somebody, and there's you. But other than that, it seems like fairly self-sufficient and not something the state's spending a lot of money on to protect people who really need it.
It's really not. It's, I run a very tight ship with Safe at Home. It doesn't have a lot of overhead. We're looking at like envelopes and stamps and those sorts of things. Like you said, we don't have a huge staff. It is just me with the Safe at Home program right now. We're hoping to expand Safe at Home sometime in the near future, just so that we can do more outreach and those sorts of things. But once you're in the program and we issue that substitute address, the majority of the administration of Safe at Home is on the victim, because they're the ones who are handing out that address to everyone. When I enroll someone in the program, I don't call every state or local government agency in their county and say, hey, we got a new one coming your way, because I don't know who they're coming into contact with. It is their responsibility to share that address with everyone that they're coming into contact with, and then I'm just functioning in the background if they need any assistance with administering that. Safe at Home is just a great program. It provides such a tremendous resource. I hear from law enforcement and from state and local government agencies all across the state as I travel around to do outreach for this program. If this program had only been around when I was working with this person or with that person, the situation would have been so much different, because ultimately Safe at Home is just a wonderful de-escalation tool. It just puts space between people. It puts air between people so that everybody can kind of breathe a little bit, and it de-escalates the situation. And that's what I hear back from victims, was that I just needed that time to kind of be able to get away and to get to a safe location so that that constant engagement isn't there keeping the conflict going. And it's been very successful at that.
Stacy Scruggs, I want to thank you for coming in and helping out with this episode of Talking Domestic Violence. I really appreciate your time. In the next episode of Talking DV, Rebecca Toka, a fellow legal aid attorney, and I will begin discussing orders of protection, how to go into court and have your abuser be ordered to stay away from you. Thank you for listening to Talking DV, a podcast that focuses on providing you with practical information on how to leave an abusive relationship. I'm your host, Dean Hinton, encouraging you to seek legal counsel for your specific case. If you cannot afford an attorney, contact your local legal aid office. Many legal aid offices often offer free legal clinics where you can speak to an attorney face-to-face about your specific legal problem. There's no reason to give up hope.